It is often assumed that absolute power creates certainty, that a ruler who answers to no one moves through the world without friction, buffered from doubt, insulated from hesitation. The image is simple and reassuring. Command flows outward, obedience flows back. Yet history leaves behind a quieter contradiction. Absolute power does not only silence opposition, it also silences feedback. And in that silence, isolation can grow until authority begins to operate without awareness of the ground beneath it. In the final years of Imperial Russia, this contradiction hardened into structure. The last Russian Tsar ruled an empire that stretched across continents, commanded vast armies, and rested on centuries of inherited legitimacy. The institutions around him were designed to preserve authority, to protect it from erosion, to shield it from challenge. But those same mechanisms also narrowed what could be seen, heard, and understood. Power accumulated, but perception thinned. What appeared unassailable from above began to fracture below. The situation was not defined by a single decision or moment of excess. It was shaped by arrangement, by ritual, by distance, by a system in which authority was centralized while experience was dispersed. The Tsar did not rule from chaos. He ruled from order, from schedules, reports, ceremonies, and hierarchies calibrated to reinforce legitimacy. Each layer added coherence to the image of control, while quietly filtering the substance of reality before it reached the center. Russia at the turn of the 20th century was undergoing rapid, uneven transformation. Industrialization pressed against agrarian life. Urban populations expanded faster than institutions could absorb. Literacy increased, expectations shifted. None of this occurred invisibly, but visibility did not guarantee comprehension. Information moved upward through channels shaped by fear, loyalty, and habit. What arrived at the throne was often delayed, softened, or rearranged to fit expectation rather than urgency. Absolute authority altered incentives. Officials learned what could be said safely. Ministers learned what would not be welcomed. Courtiers learned the cost of contradiction. Over time, a pattern settled in. Problems were framed as temporary disturbances. Warnings became technical. Discontent was translated into statistics or reassurances. The system did not lie outright. It filtered. And in filtering, it produced a version of reality that preserved stability at the cost of accuracy. The Tsar himself was not detached in temperament. He read reports, he met advisors, he prayed. He believed deeply in his role. That belief mattered. It anchored decisions not in adaptability, but in inheritance. Authority was understood as a moral duty rather than a negotiated arrangement. To doubt the structure was to doubt the meaning behind it. And so uncertainty was experienced not as a signal, but as a threat to coherence. As pressures increased, the mechanisms of control tightened. Surveillance expanded. Dissent was categorized, monitored, contained. Each act of enforcement confirmed the necessity of the system. Yet enforcement also widened the gap between ruler and ruled. Information flowed upward slower than reaction flowed downward. Decisions arrived as commands rather than responses. Authority preserved itself procedurally, while responsiveness eroded structurally. War intensified this imbalance. Mobilization magnified existing weaknesses. Logistics strained. Casualties accumulated. Reports multiplied, but distance remained. The Tsar's position, both physical and symbolic, placed him above the immediate consequences of decisions. Suffering was registered abstractly. Numbers replaced proximity. The system could account for loss without absorbing its meaning. When unrest surfaced more openly, it was often interpreted as disorder rather than signal. Strikes became disruptions. Protests became breakdowns of discipline. The possibility that these were expressions of systemic strain struggled to penetrate a framework built to interpret challenge as deviation. Authority had been trained over generations to see resistance as anomaly, not feedback. Even reform, when attempted, moved cautiously, constrained by the need to preserve legitimacy. Concessions were framed as generosity, not adjustment. Institutions were added without redistributing authority meaningfully. Each reform preserved the image of control while deferring its substance. The result was not stasis, but accumulation of unresolved pressure. Isolation deepened not through neglect, but through structure. The Tsar was surrounded constantly, yet increasingly alone in perception. His proximity to power insulated him from consequence. His certainty narrowed his field of vision. The system rewarded continuity over correction. Over time, the gap between command and comprehension widened into something harder to bridge. When collapse came, it did not arrive as a single rupture. It arrived as a loss of coherence. Orders ceased to carry weight. Loyalty fractured unevenly. Institutions hesitated. Authority remained formally intact even as its practical force dissolved. The center still issued commands, but the periphery no longer aligned itself automatically. Power existed, but connection did not. In hindsight, it is tempting to locate the failure in character or morality or miscalculation. But the pattern extends beyond one ruler. Absolute authority, by its nature, reorganizes information. It simplifies feedback. It concentrates decision-making while dispersing consequence. Over time, this imbalance produces isolation not as an accident, but as an outcome of design. What makes this pattern enduring is its subtlety. Isolation does not announce itself. It emerges quietly through repetition, through habits that feel stabilizing, through systems that function smoothly until they do not. The Tsar did not lose power because he ignored reality. He lost it because the structure of power altered what reality could reach him. The erosion was not sudden, it was cumulative. Each filtered report, each deferred warning, each symbolic gesture substituted for engagement added to the distance. Authority became more coherent internally and less adaptive externally. The empire appeared strong precisely because its center felt stable, even as its edges strained. At a certain point, adjustment required acknowledgement of uncertainty, but uncertainty had been framed as weakness. To admit it would have meant reframing the meaning of authority itself, and so restraint gave way to rigidity. Preservation replaced adaptation. The system continued as designed, long after its design no longer matched conditions. This pattern does not belong solely to Imperial Russia. It appears wherever authority is insulated from consequence, wherever legitimacy is inherited rather than recalibrated, wherever systems prioritize continuity over responsiveness. The names change, the structures echo. The unsettling question is not why the last Russian Tsar failed to see what was coming. It is how often systems teach those at the center that they already see enough. How authority can mistake silence for stability. How power, when unchecked by feedback, can become a closed circuit, circulating certainty while starving itself of information. What remains unresolved is where isolation truly begins. Is it imposed by distance or chosen through belief? Does authority drift away from reality because it cannot hear, or because it cannot afford to listen? And when power finally confronts the limits of its own perception, is collapse the cause, or merely the moment when isolation becomes visible? The story does not end with a lesson. It ends with a pattern suspended in time. Authority concentrating, feedback thinning, certainty hardening, and somewhere within that structure, a ruler surrounded by power, yet increasingly alone, mistaking the quiet for control as the ground beneath shifts without permission. If this reflection resonated with you, you can find more explorations like this on Timeless Questions, where history, power, and human nature quietly intersect.